After my husband's funeral, my sister announced, "My son is your husband's child. I'm taking half of your $800,000 house." She showed me a will. I almost laughed out loud. Because there was something she didn't know about my husband. My name is Carolyn, and at 34 years old, I never expected to be a widow. Just 3 months ago, I lost Walter, my husband of 11 years, to a sudden aneurysm. One minute he was here, complaining about a headache before work, and the next, he was gone. There's no preparing for that kind of silence. The emptiness in our big Victorian house was a living thing, a constant, heavy presence in every room. Walter was my whole world, and that world had just stopped. Just days after his funeral, when the casseroles from neighbors had stopped arriving and the sympathetic phone calls had trickled to a stop, I had to drag myself to my nephew Jared's first birthday party. The last thing on earth I wanted to do was put on a brave face and watch a baby smash his hands into a cake, but it was for my sister, Cheryl. My mother had called, her voice gentle but firm. "Honey, you should go. Walter always said family comes first. He would want you to be there." She was right, of course. Walter did always say that. He was the one who always encouraged me to look past Cheryl's difficult nature. So, I found myself driving to her small rental house across town, a brightly wrapped gift on the passenger seat and dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. I hadn't slept a full night since Walter died, my body still instinctively reaching for his warmth in our bed, only to find the cold, empty sheets. The party was exactly as awful as I expected. But it was what happened in the middle of it, right when they brought out the cake, that turned my life upside down for the second time in 3 months. My sister, Cheryl, stood up, tapped her glass with a spoon, and with a strange, triumphant look in her eye, she made an announcement. An announcement that was aimed directly at me. And she didn't just want sympathy or attention. She wanted my house, my life, and she had a piece of paper she claimed would give it to her. Before I tell you what she said, I need you to understand about Walter. I need you to know who he was, and what he meant to me. Without that, the rest of this story, it just doesn't make sense. We met 12 years ago, at a charity auction for a children's cancer hospital. I was a volunteer, arranging the silent auction items, and he was just a man in a suit who outbid everyone for a painting I'd been staring at all night. It was a simple watercolor, the Boston skyline at sunset, with these vibrant oranges and purples that seemed to bleed right into the harbor. After he won, he walked straight over to me, not with a swagger, but with this kind, gentle smile that made his blue eyes crinkle at the corners. He handed it to me. "I noticed you looking at this all night," he said. "I think it belongs with you." That was Walter. Thoughtful, observant, and generous to a fault. I fell for him so hard and so fast it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Our first date was the next night, and we talked for hours, like we'd known each other our whole lives. He was a corporate lawyer, brilliant but so humble about it. He remembered the names of waiters and asked them about their kids. He was just a good man. A truly good man. 8 months later, he proposed on the harbor, with the real skyline behind us, a perfect mirror of the painting that brought us together. Shortly after our first anniversary, we bought our house. It was an old Victorian in Beacon Hill, a bit of a financial stretch at $800,000, but Walter had just made partner at his firm, and my interior design business was finally taking off. The house needed work, but it had good bones, high ceilings, and a little garden out back where I pictured our future children playing. Those children never came. It wasn't for a lack of trying. For years, our lives were a cycle of hope and heartbreak. We charted temperatures, we timed everything, we prayed. Then came the doctors, the tests, the invasive procedures, and 4 agonizing rounds of IVF that drained our savings and our spirits. I still remember the quiet drive home from the clinic after the last failed attempt. The silence was so heavy, it felt like you could touch it. Walter just reached across the console and took my hand, his thumb stroking my knuckles. Neither of us said a word, because we both knew that was the end of that road. That night, we sat on our porch swing, and he pulled me close. We can still have a beautiful life, he whispered into my hair. You and me. That's enough. And he meant it. He truly, truly meant it. So we rebuilt our dreams around each other. We traveled. We poured our hearts into our careers. Walter supported me completely when I launched my own design firm. We renovated that old house room by room, turning it into the showcase I'd always imagined. Our life was full. It was different than we'd planned, but it was ours, and it was good. My younger sister, Cheryl, was always on the periphery of our happiness. She's 4 years younger than me, and has always been the wild child of the family. While I was building a career, she was bouncing between dead-end jobs and rocky relationships. Our parents were constantly worried about her, which meant they were constantly making excuses for her and bailing her out of financial trouble. Our relationship was complicated. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, with a kind of charm that drew people in. But with me, there was always this undercurrent of competition. If I achieved something, she had to one-up me, or at least try to. When I started dating Walter, a lawyer, she suddenly developed an intense interest in law students. When we bought our house, she complained for months about her tiny apartment, fishing for our parents to help her with a down payment. It was exhausting. But Walter, in his infinite kindness, always encouraged me to maintain the relationship. She's your only sister, Carolyn, he would say. Family is important. 2 years ago, Cheryl started dating a guy named Vince, a bartender she met at a club. He was ruggedly handsome, with arms full of tattoos and a motorcycle that my parents openly despised. Their relationship was a roller coaster of dramatic breakups and passionate reconciliations. Then, at Thanksgiving dinner, a year before Walter died, she announced she was pregnant. I'll be honest, it stung. It felt like a physical blow. After all our struggles, all our heartbreak, all the money we'd spent, Cheryl had just accidentally achieved the one thing we wanted more than anything. But I pushed that feeling down. I was determined to be happy for her, to be the best aunt I could be. When her son, Jared, was born, I was there at the hospital with flowers and a blanket I'd spent months knitting. Motherhood overwhelmed Cheryl from the start. She was always calling me in tears, exhausted, complaining about the baby crying. I stepped in as much as I could. I'd go over and do her laundry. I even watched Jared overnight a few times just so she could get some sleep. That's why, when my mom called about the party, I felt like I couldn't say no. I remember the conversation so clearly. I was sitting in the kitchen, staring at Walter's empty coffee mug, which I still couldn't bring myself to put away. I just don't think I can handle it, Mom, I'd said, my voice barely a whisper. I know it's hard, sweetie. But it's Jared's first birthday. Cheryl needs the support. Cheryl always needs support, I muttered. Carolyn, please. Do it for Walter. He loved that little boy. That was the line that got me. So I agreed. I found a gift, a little wooden train set, wrapped it in blue paper, and prepared myself for an afternoon of faking smiles. The moment I parked my car down the street from Cheryl's rental, I had a bad feeling. The air was thick and humid, the kind that promises a thunderstorm. I took a few deep breaths, plastered on a smile that felt like a Halloween mask, and walked up to the front door. Cheryl's friend, Jenna, opened it, and her eyes widened for just a second when she saw me. Oh, Carolyn. You made it, she said, her voice sounding oddly strained. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping aside. Everyone's in the backyard. The small house was filled with blue balloons and a big banner that read Happy First Birthday Jared. I noticed a small group of people I didn't recognize huddled in the kitchen, whispering. They fell silent as I walked past, their eyes following me. It was unnerving. Out in the small, patchy backyard, more guests stood around in awkward little groups. I spotted my parents at a picnic table. They looked deeply uncomfortable. My father's face flooded with relief when he saw me. Carolyn, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt a little too tight. "We weren't sure you'd come." "Of course I came," I said, trying to sound cheerful as I placed the gift on a table piled high with toys. "Where's the birthday boy?" "With Cheryl," my mother said, her eyes darting away from mine. "They'll be out in a minute for the cake." I spent the next 30 minutes in a haze of excruciating small talk. People I barely knew offered their condolences, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Every conversation felt like it was walking on eggshells. It seemed like every time I approached a group, the chatter would die down abruptly. I tried to brush it off, telling myself people just don't know how to act around a new widow. Finally, Cheryl emerged from the house, holding Jared on her hip. She was wearing a new dress I'd never seen before, her hair freshly highlighted. She looked energized. Almost giddy. She barely glanced at me as she strapped a beaming Jared into his high chair. Then, instead of starting the happy birthday song, she picked up a spoon and tapped it against her plastic cup, a sharp, repetitive clinking that cut through the low murmur of the party. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Jared's special day," she began, her voice loud and clear across the yard. The guests exchanged nervous glances. My mother suddenly became very interested in her shoes. A cold chill ran down my spine. Something was very, very wrong. "I've been keeping a secret," Cheryl continued, placing a proprietary hand on Jared's head. "One that I can no longer hide, especially after recent events." Then she looked right at me, a strange, hard smile on her face. The world seemed to slow down. The buzzing of the cicadas in the trees grew louder, and the background noise of the party faded into a dull roar in my ears. Cheryl's voice cut through it all, sharp and rehearsed. "Jared is not Vince's son," she announced, her eyes locked on mine. A collective gasp went through the crowd. My father stiffened beside me. "He's Walter's son." The words hung in the hot, still air. Walter's son. She was claiming that my husband, my faithful, loving Walter, had cheated on me with my own sister. That my nephew, the little boy I had knitted blankets for and rocked to sleep, was actually my husband's child. It was so outrageous, so monstrously false, that my first reaction wasn't tears. It wasn't even anger. It was a bizarre, hysterical bubble of laughter that rose in my chest. I had to press my lips together so hard my jaw ached to keep it from escaping. Cheryl wasn't finished. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, holding it up like a trophy. "Walter knew the truth about Jared," she declared. "Before he died, he updated his will. He wanted his son to be provided for." She let her eyes sweep across the stunned faces of our family and friends. "This will states that half of the house Walter and Carolyn own should go to Jared, as his biological child." Every single person in that yard turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes on me, a heavy weight of pity, shock, and morbid fascination. My parents looked like they'd been turned to stone. And then, to everyone's astonishment, including my own, a small smile touched my lips. I couldn't help it. It was the kind of smile that comes when something is so absurdly, comically untrue that it breaks your brain a little bit. I took a slow sip of my water, buying myself a moment to push down the insane urge to laugh in her face. Finally, I found my voice. It came out calm and even, which seemed to surprise Cheryl more than anything else. "Oh, I see," I said. I stood up, my movements deliberate. "May I see this will, Cheryl?" Her confident expression wavered for a fraction of a second. She had clearly expected hysterics, a public breakdown. She hadn't expected this quiet calm. Slowly, she walked over and handed me the single-typed page. I scanned it quickly. It was a joke. The legal language was all wrong, nothing like the documents I'd seen Walter bring home from his firm. And the signature, it was a decent forgery, I suppose, but the connecting stroke between the W and the N Walter was wrong, and the final flourish was too dramatic. Walter's signature was simple, understated. Like him. I carefully folded the paper and handed it back to her. Thank you for sharing this with me, I said politely. I think I need to go now. That's it? Cheryl stammered, confusion clouding her face. You're not going to say anything else? Not right now, I replied, gathering my purse. This is Jared's day. We can discuss this, privately. Later. I said a brief goodbye to my shell-shocked parents, promising to call them, and walked away, feeling the stares of every guest on my back. The party was ruined, the atmosphere completely shattered. Once I was safely inside my car, out of view, I finally let it out. The laugh that had been clawing its way up my throat burst out of me. It started as a small chuckle, then grew into a full-blown, body-shaking laugh, so intense that tears started streaming down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, but tears from a strange, overwhelming mix of grief, rage, and sheer, incredulous disbelief at my sister's audacity. Because there was something Cheryl didn't know. Something Walter and I had never shared with anyone, not even our own parents. Something that made her elaborate, cruel lie not just hurtful, but utterly, biologically impossible. You're probably wondering why I didn't scream, why I didn't call her a liar right then and there in front of everyone. It's because a scene like that was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to break, to look unhinged. But more than that, I knew I held a truth so powerful, it would dismantle her entire fantasy with cold, hard facts. To understand that, we have to go back 3 years, long before Jared was even conceived. We had invited Cheryl over for dinner. I think it was to celebrate a new job she'd gotten, her longest one to date, maybe 3 or 4 months. Walter had made his famous lasagna, and we'd opened a nice bottle of wine. It was a pleasant evening, or so I thought. At one point, I had to step away to take a work call from a frantic client having a meltdown over the placement of a ridiculously expensive piece of art. The call took about 20 minutes. When I came back to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. Cheryl was sitting much closer to Walter than before, her hand resting on his arm as she laughed at something he'd said. Walter looked uncomfortable. I didn't think much of it at the time. Cheryl had always been overly affectionate, and the wine had been flowing. But later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, Walter sat on the edge of the mattress, his expression troubled. There's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice low. And I don't want it to cause problems between you and your sister, but I also don't ever want to keep secrets from you. He then told me that while I was on the phone, Cheryl had made a pass at him. It wasn't anything overt, just a series of inappropriate comments about how lucky I was, followed by a suggestion that he'd deserve someone who could truly appreciate him. When he gently rebuffed her, she just laughed it off, saying he was being too sensitive. I was hurt, but honestly, not entirely surprised. It was classic Cheryl, always pushing boundaries. We decided to let it go, hoping it was just a one-time, wine-fueled mistake. But it wasn't. Over the next few months, it kept happening. She'd find little ways to touch his arm or his back when she thought I wasn't looking. She sent him text messages that walked a fine line between friendly and flirty. The final straw was when she showed up at his law office uninvited, asking him to lunch. Each time, Walter was a rock. He gently but firmly shut her down and told me about it immediately afterward. After the office incident, we decided we had to talk to our parents. It did not go well. They suggested Walter was misinterpreting her friendly gestures. My mother, with the best intentions and the worst judgment, even suggested that maybe Walter was flattered by the attention and exaggerating things. That night, Walter and I made a decision. We would create distance from Cheryl without blowing up the family. We started declining invitations we knew would include her. We made sure we were never alone with her. And after one particularly suggestive late-night message, Walter blocked her number on his phone. It was a quiet, sad solution to an ugly problem. But it was nothing compared to the secret that came next. About 2.5 years ago, Walter started experiencing some persistent pain. After weeks of me nagging him, he finally went to a urologist. The diagnosis was a varicocele, an enlargement of veins that required surgery. The procedure itself was supposed to be straightforward, but there was a complication. The doctor explained that due to the extensive nature of the issue and the high potential for recurrence, he strongly recommended a vasectomy be performed at the same time. It was a devastating conversation. Here we were, a couple who had been through the emotional wringer of infertility, now facing a decision that would close that door forever. We talked for hours that night, and cried a little too. But in the end, we agreed it was the right choice for Walter's long-term health. The vasectomy was performed successfully 2 years before Jared was conceived. We kept this information completely private. After years of enduring invasive, painful questions from relatives about why we didn't have children, we had learned to guard our privacy fiercely when it came to reproductive issues. The only people on earth who knew were me, Walter, and his doctors. Not my parents, and certainly not Cheryl. A few days after the surgery, as Walter was recovering in our garden with a discreetly placed ice pack, he said something that seemed almost paranoid at the time. "Cheryl's not done," he said, looking out at the daffodils we had planted. "I have a feeling she might try something more drastic one day." I laughed it off, but Walter was serious. The very next week, he scheduled an appointment with our family lawyer, Arthur Vance. I went with him. I listened as Walter calmly and methodically detailed Cheryl's behavior over the past year and explained his recent medical procedure. Arthur, a wise old lawyer who had been Walter's mentor, listened intently. He recommended we document everything, the unwanted advances, the text messages, and most importantly, the medical records confirming the vasectomy. "You never know what might become relevant," Arthur advised. "It's better to have documentation and never need it than to wish you had it later." So we did. We created a file, a disaster preparation kit as Walter jokingly called it. He also had Arthur help him officially update his will, making it ironclad that everything would go to me. We placed the original documents, the real will, the medical records, printed copies of Cheryl's texts, and a letter from Arthur, into a safety deposit box at our bank. "Just in case," Walter had said as he locked the box. Though I planned to be around to deal with any of Cheryl's drama for at least another 50 years. My practical, thoughtful, amazing husband. He had prepared for this. Not this exact scenario, perhaps, but he had seen the storm clouds gathering on the horizon and had built me a shelter. The morning after Jared's birthday party, I didn't cry. I didn't call my mother to scream at her. I got up, took a shower, put on a business suit, and drove straight to the bank. The branch manager, Mr. Henderson, who had known Walter and me for years, greeted me with a sad smile. "Mrs. Preston," he said softly, "please accept my deepest condolences." He personally escorted me down to the vault. He left me alone in the small, sterile viewing room. I took the cold, heavy metal box out of the slot and placed it on the table. My hands were trembling slightly as I turned the key. Inside, nestled in a neat file, was everything Walter and I had put there. Our disaster preparation kit. It was all there, exactly as I remembered. Walter's legitimate, notarized will, leaving everything to me, his wife. The medical records, detailing his vasectomy 2 years before Jared's conception, making it biologically impossible for Walter to be the father. A small journal Walter had kept, documenting every inappropriate interaction with Cheryl, complete with dates, times, and direct quotes. Printed copies of the flirtatious text messages she had sent him. And at the very bottom, a sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's familiar, steady handwriting. With shaking fingers, I tore it open. "My dearest Carolyn," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and you've needed to access these documents. I hope it's many, many years from now, when we are old and gray and Cheryl's antics are just a distant memory we laugh about. But if not, if the worst has happened and she has tried to hurt you in my absence, please know that I tried to prepare for every possibility. Use these documents to protect yourself. I know how much you value family, how loyal you are. But you deserve to be protected from those who would take advantage of that beautiful heart of yours. I love you beyond words, beyond time. Whatever happens, know that. Always, Walter. Tears finally streamed down my face as I read his words. It felt like he was right there in the room with me, his love reaching out to protect me one last time. My practical, wonderful husband had anticipated this. He had seen the darkness in my sister and had built a fortress of truth to keep me safe. I carefully put everything back in the box, except for copies of what I would need, the medical records, the legitimate will, and a few selected entries from Walter's journal. Then I pulled out my phone, my grief momentarily overshadowed by a cold, clear sense of purpose. I called Arthur Vance's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. The game was on. Arthur Vance's law office was in a stately brownstone downtown, the kind of place that smelled of old books, lemon polish, and quiet competence. Arthur, a man in his 60s with silver hair and a kind face, had been devastated to hear about Walter. He greeted me with a brief, fatherly hug. He was one of the good ones, Carolyn, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He was, I agreed, my own voice catching. And it seems he was also right about preparing for the worst with my sister. I laid out the whole ugly story for him, ending with the forged will Cheryl had presented. He examined the document under his desk lamp, his brow furrowed. "This is an amateurish forgery," he said finally, taking off his reading glasses. "The language is all wrong, and the signature would never stand up to expert analysis. But the fact that she created this at all, it's deeply troubling." I then showed him the contents of my folder, the real will, Walter's journal, and the medical records. He reviewed them carefully, a slow, grim nod accompanying each page turn. "Walter was nothing if not thorough," he murmured. "These medical records alone completely disprove her claim. The vasectomy was performed 2 years before the child was conceived. It's a biological impossibility." "So what should I do, Arthur?" I asked, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I don't want to publicly humiliate her, but I can't let her get away with this. I can't let her tarnish Walter's memory and try to take half of our home with a lie. Arthur leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. "First, we need more information. People rarely attempt fraud of this magnitude without some kind of severe financial pressure. I recommend we hire a private investigator to look into Cheryl's current situation." He recommended a man named Mitch Corrigan, a former police detective his firm often used. I agreed immediately. An hour later, Mitch arrived. He was a stocky, no-nonsense man with a Boston accent you could cut with a knife. He listened intently as I explained everything, taking notes in a small, worn-out notebook and asking pointed questions about Cheryl's job history, her relationship with Vince, and her spending habits. I realized, with a pang of guilt, how little I actually knew about her current life. "What about the baby's father, Vince?" Mitch asked. "Last I heard, they were still together, but she rarely mentions him anymore," I said. "He wasn't at the party yesterday, which I thought was strange." Mitch nodded, a grim look on his face. "That's a good starting point. I'll be in touch in a few days." 3 days later, Mitch called and requested another meeting at Arthur's office. When I arrived, both men were looking over a stack of documents spread across the conference table, their expressions grim. "Mrs. Preston," Mitch began without any preamble, "I've uncovered some very concerning information about your sister's situation." What he laid out next was a portrait of absolute desperation. Cheryl was in dire financial straits. She had accumulated over $75,000 in debt, credit cards, personal loans, and unpaid medical bills for Jared, who apparently had a minor heart defect that required surgery shortly after his birth. Her credit score was in the gutter, and she was facing eviction. Mitch slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the notice her landlord had filed. She had until the end of the month to pay 4 months of back rent or she and her son would be out on the street. As for Vince, the supposed father, he had skipped town shortly after Jared was born, moving to Seattle with a new girlfriend. He was paying a minimal amount of child support, and even that was irregular. "But this," Mitch said, his voice dropping, "is the smoking gun." He produced printouts of text messages. They were between Cheryl and her friend Jenna, the one who'd opened the door at the party. My blood ran cold as I read them. One text from Cheryl read, "Walter's death is terrible, but maybe it's finally my chance to get what I deserve. That house has to be worth at least $800K now. This is my only shot." Another one, "The will is almost ready. My friend Dave is good with Photoshop and found a sample of Walter's signature online from some old charity thing. It looks totally legit." And the one that made me feel physically ill, "Bridget has always been the golden child. Time for me to get my share. She got 11 years with a great guy and a high salary. The least she can do is share the inheritance now that he's gone." This wasn't a crime of passion or a desperate, spur-of-the-moment decision. This was cold, calculated, premeditated fraud, designed to capitalize on my grief. "There's more," Mitch said gently. "I ran a background check on Vince Martin, the actual father. He has a history of domestic violence charges and a warrant out for unpaid child support for another kid in New Hampshire." I just sat there, stunned into silence, the damning pages laid out in front of me. My sister wasn't just desperate, she was willing to destroy Walter's reputation, our marriage, and my entire life to solve her money problems. "What do I do with all this?" I finally whispered, looking from Arthur to Mitch. Arthur removed his glasses. "You have a choice, Carolyn. We can file criminal charges for attempted fraud and forgery. Given the amount of money involved, she would likely face prison time." He saw the distress on my face and continued. "Or, we can handle this privately. Confront her with the evidence, force her to retract her claims, and work out an arrangement that protects both you and the child." I spent the next day preparing. On Arthur's advice, I set up a small, discreet audio recorder on the coffee table in my living room. I arranged the documents, the medical records, the wills, the text messages, the eviction notice, in a neat folder. Then I called my sister. "We need to talk about the will," I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. "Can you come to my house tomorrow afternoon?" "Just you." "I knew you'd come around," she replied, her voice dripping with smug satisfaction. "I'll be there at 2. She arrived precisely on time, looking polished and confident in a new outfit. I led her to the living room, where I had 2 chairs facing each other. "I hope you don't mind if we record our conversation," I said calmly, gesturing to the device on the table. "It seems prudent, given the legal nature of what we're discussing." She hesitated for only a moment before shrugging. "Sure, whatever. The will is clear." I pressed record, stated the date and time, and confirmed her consent. Then I looked her straight in the eye. "Before we discuss the will, Cheryl, I want you to tell me exactly what you claim happened between you and Walter." She launched into a well-rehearsed story about a torrid affair, stolen moments in a downtown hotel, how Walter had confessed his unhappiness in our marriage. It was a sickening performance, filled with practiced sincerity. I let her finish, and then I began to ask questions. "Which hotel?" I asked. "The Mandarin Oriental," she replied quickly. "What side of the bed did he prefer?" "What? Did he shower before or after?" Her answers became vague and she grew flustered. "Why does any of this matter?" she finally snapped. "The point is that Jared is Walter's son." "Actually," I said calmly, opening my folder, "both of those claims are demonstrably false." I placed the first document on the table between us. These are Walter's medical records. 2 years before Jared was conceived, Walter had a vasectomy. It was physically impossible for him to father a child. Her face drained of all color. She picked up the papers with a trembling hand. These could be faked," she stammered. "They're not," I said, my voice like ice. "Next." I laid down Walter's actual will, properly notarized and filed with the court. "This is Walter's real will. It leaves everything to me." "The will I have is more recent," she insisted, her voice cracking. "The will you have," I said, leaning forward, "is a felony. A poor forgery, I might add. My lawyer has already identified multiple legal inconsistencies, and the signature is fake. Forgery of this kind in Massachusetts is punishable by up to 5 years in prison. Then came the final blows. I showed her Walter's journal documenting her advances. I showed her the printouts of her text messages with Jenna, the ones discussing Dave and his Photoshop skills. And finally, I showed her the PI's report on her $75,000 debt and her impending eviction. "We know everything, Cheryl," I said softly, as she sat there, utterly broken. "The question now is, what happens next?" For a long moment, she just stared. Then, a shudder went through her body, and she began to sob. Not the theatrical tears she used to manipulate our parents, but deep, gut-wrenching sobs of complete and utter defeat. "I didn't know what else to do," she gasped. "I'm going to be homeless. Vince left us with nothing. The bills just keep coming." "So you decided to destroy my husband's reputation?" I asked, my voice hard. "To tell the world he cheated on me?" "You have everything," she shrieked, her sadness turning to rage. "This big house, a successful business. What do I have? A baby with a heart condition and an eviction notice." In that raw, ugly outburst, stripped of all her lies, she finally confessed everything. That Jared was Vince's son. That Walter had never, ever touched her. That he was, in her own words, annoyingly loyal to you. She had been so sure I would just pay her to make the problem go away. She never thought I would actually fight back. If you're still listening, could you do me a huge favor and like this video and comment the number 1 down below? It lets me know you've given me a thumbs up and that you're on this journey with me. Your support is a huge encouragement and really keeps me going. Please, comment with a 1, and then let me tell you what happened next. I turned off the recorder and let the silence hang in the air, broken only by Cheryl's ragged breathing. She watched me nervously, clearly expecting me to pick up the phone and call the police. "I could press charges," I said finally, my voice flat. "What you did was illegal. And cruel." She nodded miserably. "I know. But that would hurt Jared," I continued. "And despite everything you've done, he is my nephew. And I love him." I leaned forward, making sure she was looking me directly in the eyes. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to tell everyone the truth. You will apologize publicly to me and to Walter's memory." "And then what?" she whispered. "We'll still be evicted. In exchange for your full confession and a legal agreement to never attempt anything like this again," I laid out my terms. "I will help you and Jared. Not by giving you half my house. But I will set up a trust fund to cover Jared's future education and medical needs. A college fund. And I will help you find stable housing." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Why would you do that?" "Not for you," I said honestly. "For Jared. And because Walter would want me to help his nephew, even if that nephew's mother tried to destroy his reputation. But there are conditions." I told her she would have to enter therapy and financial counseling. She would have to find and maintain steady employment, contribute to her own rent. And she would have to allow me to be a consistent part of Jared's life, to ensure he was being properly cared for. If she violated any of the conditions, the support would stop. Immediately. The following Saturday, I hosted a family dinner. Just me, Cheryl, and our parents. It was the most tense meal of my life. With the recorder on the table again, Cheryl, pale and trembling, confessed everything. She told them she had lied about the affair, that Jared was Vince's son, and that she had forged the will out of desperation. My parents were shocked. My father was furious, but my mother's immediate reaction was to try and smooth things over. "Oh, honey," she said to Cheryl, "why didn't you just come to us for help?" It was then that I had to set my own boundaries. "Would you have given her $400,000, Mom?" I asked bluntly. Because that's what she was trying to get. My mother insisted I shouldn't press charges, that she's family. I am family, too, I said, my voice rising. Your daughter who just lost her husband. Where was your concern for me in all of this? I told them that their lifelong habit of bailing Cheryl out, of making excuses for her, had enabled this behavior. For the first time, Cheryl agreed with me. Bridget's right, she whispered. You always fixed my mistakes. It didn't help me. It was a painful, ugly, but necessary conversation. It was the beginning of a new, more honest, and much more difficult chapter for our family. It's been a year now since Walter's death. A year since that awful birthday party. The garden he planted last fall is in full bloom, a riot of yellow daffodils that feel like a message from him. So much has changed. The trust fund for Jared is established, and it's helping with his ongoing medical care. He's a happy, thriving little toddler now. Cheryl, to everyone's surprise, has stuck to the agreement. She's been in therapy for months and is finally starting to understand the patterns that have ruled her life. She found a steady job as an office manager at a dental practice, something with a regular salary and benefits. Our relationship is formal, but it's peaceful. I see Jared every week, and we coexist for his sake. As for me, I found a grief support group that became my lifeline. And I found a new purpose. 3 months after the confrontation, I used a portion of Walter's life insurance to establish the Walter Preston Foundation for Legal Education, providing scholarships for underprivileged students. It feels right. It feels like his goodness is still rippling out into the world. And then, there's Michael. I met him at a fundraiser for the foundation. He's a professor of ethics, thoughtful and kind, with a quiet sense of humor that sometimes reminds me of Walter. We're taking things very, very slowly. He understands that Walter will always be a part of my life, that loving again doesn't mean replacing what I lost. Standing here in the garden, I think about everything I've learned. I learned that family relationships need boundaries to be healthy. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing harmful patterns to continue. But most of all, I learned about my own strength. Walter's foresight protected me when I was at my most vulnerable, but it was up to me to use those tools to fight for myself, for his memory. If there's one thing I would share with anyone facing betrayal within their own family, it's this: protect yourself with both documentation and boundaries. The people who truly love you will respect those boundaries, and the ones who don't were never safe for you to begin with. The grief for Walter is still here. It always will be. But now, it sits alongside hope. And I know, wherever he is, he would be proud.